FAIRtax is coming, don't stand in the way. FAIRtax is coming across the USA. FAIRtax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey!
Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Molero.
And we are the
FAIRtax Guys.
And before we get going today, let's cover a little something that folks have asked us about. It concerns the music that we play at the beginning and the end of the show. That is the FAIRtax song by a group called Banks and Shane. And you know more about them than I do.
Well, they're out of Atlanta. I looked on their website. They have I've used their music before when I've made my short little videos, but I just want to give these guys credit for first a really interesting, rousing song. I mean, there's no question about it. You know, when you hear that, you know, the FAIRtax is coming and so forth. So I wrote to them off of their website and told them how much we enjoyed it, and they wrote back and said thank you. We're still big FAIRtax supporters, and there's a little bit of history in there. If you listen to the entire song, you'll hear in one part where they talk about 60,000 pages of IRS confusion, because that song was written in 2005, right after Bortz and Linder came out with the book, the first book. So that was, 11 years ago?
It's worse than that now.
Yeah, so 11 years ago it was 60,000 pages. Now it's around 75. You know, that alone tells you something, that we have something that's kind of out of control here.
That we do. And if we're lucky, we might be able to get those guys on the phone, or at least one of them, and talk to them one of these days on a future episode of FAIRtax Power Radio.
That would be good. That would be interesting.
We'll work on that if you can find their phone number. But let's press on here with what the subject of the day is. And we've spent the past several episodes telling people why they should like the FAIRtax, why they should be a FAIRtax fan. But there's another piece of the puzzle here that people really need to know about and really need to understand, and that takes place on the business side of the equation. Even if you're not a small business owner, that the FAIRtax is going to have quite an effect on the economy because of the effect that it will have on business. And the largest effect that the FAIRtax will have on business is that it all but eliminates their compliance costs. You know, today businesses spend thousands, if not millions of dollars on accountants and lawyers and, you know, tax software, and just the money they have to spend in order to comply with the tax code over and above the actual tax liability. Yeah. It's tremendous. And of course, then the tax liability itself under the FAIRtax goes to zero, and that's something else we'll be discussing a bit later on FAIRtax Power Radio. But businesses, I mean, especially if you own a business, the FAIRtax is just wonderful for you. Your tax liability goes to zero. Your compliance costs go almost completely out the window. And so that raises the question, well, if these companies are going to get this windfall by this huge reduction in their operating costs, what are they going to do with the savings? Yeah. You have a whole list of things over there.
Well, the first off, I've heard this so often, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, well, they're just going to keep it. All right? They're not going to reduce their prices. They're just going to keep it.
Yeah, but we've seen that movie before, and it doesn't work.
Well, what does that mean? I mean, really, when you're talking about a corporation, whether it's 2 people or 2,000 people or 200,000, what is the corporation going to do? First off, if you're in business, your 2 primary goals, I'm not a business expert, but your 2 primary goals is, 1, to make a profit. If you can't make a profit, there's not much point in being in business. And the other one is to stay in business. So what are you going to do? Well, the thing is, what we need to ask is, what can the companies do with that savings?
Yeah, and to say, we saw this movie before. We had it a while back that a specific 9/11 related tax on airline tickets expired. And everybody was thinking, well, the airlines will just keep their prices the same, pocket the difference. And that worked until one airline decided, wait a minute, if I pass this savings on, I can probably swipe a few of their more passengers, because in a competitive business climate like we've got now, market share is everything. Yeah. And you're always looking for even, 1 or 2% more market share. And how can you get that? And you can get that by being the most attractive option for the customers that are out there wanting to buy those goods or that particular service. And in the airline's case, this one airline, and I don't remember which one it was, they cut their price. It was about 2 or 3% tax. It wasn't a huge tax, but that little bit of reduction, when they passed that on, everybody else had to follow suit, or they would lose passenger share, lose market share. And so the competitive pressures of a free market are going to keep somebody, or all of them, from just pocketing that savings. Because in order to get away with that, they would have to work together, and that under federal law is called collusion, and you can go to jail for that.
Yeah.
So
and
that is just not going to happen.
That example that Bob stated, how long did it take the other companies to catch on what was going on and to drop their prices? It was a matter of days, just a few days. They caught on what was going on. So, yes, competition reigns supreme. You may be able to work your way around government regulations, but as a company, you cannot avoid competitive market forces. They're there. You have to deal with them.
So when all those costs of doing business go away, the price, in a lot of cases we're talking about the wholesale price of products that are produced and sold at the wholesale level, those prices are going to go way down. Now, there's a little bit different effect on the consumer we'll get to a little bit later when the fair tax is added back in at the retail level. But for the wholesale level, wholesale prices are going to go way down.
Yeah, and what we need to talk about today, the first book, the FAIRtax book, there was an oversimplification of what was going to happen. The prices were going to, the compliance costs add up to about 22% on average of every product and service we buy. And the point was, well, they're going to drop down 22% and the fair tax at 23% will go in, so there'll be a slight increase. Well, it's not that simple. I mean, they may come down that much for some industry, but there are a number of things that companies can do, all right? They can reduce prices. They can take that savings into research and development and maybe expand their product line or their service line. They could give it to employees as raises or increases in benefits. They could just put it in savings. They could buy their stock back. They could increase dividends. There's lots of things that business can do, but they're going to come back to what is best for our business. And it may be different from one industry to another. So we can't predict exactly what's going to happen. However, if you read FAIRtax Friday, that comes out as an email from the Americans for Fair Taxation. If you're not getting it, go to fairtax.org and sign up for FAIRtax Friday. In a recent episode or article in there, in the chairman's report, he stated that their best estimates is that prices will increase maybe 8 to 13%. Okay? And, people are going to jump up and down. My God, everything's going to go up 13%. But there's more to the story than that. Oh, yeah. Prices are going to change.
What happens to your paycheck here?
Yeah. Other things are going to change. Keep in mind that, and don't forget this, you're going to get your entire paycheck. The withholding, it goes away because when we eliminate the income tax, there's no need to withhold income tax or FICA. Which is FICA is for Social Security and Medicare. And no, that doesn't mean Social Security and Medicare are going to disappear. It's written into the fair tax bill that a certain percentage of the proceeds from the fair tax must go to support Social Security and Medicare. So that's going to be supported. But the withholding goes away, so you get a bigger paycheck. And then what else, Bob?
You've also got the prebate.
Yeah.
Which is a fancy word for a tax refund that you get every month. Under the current income tax system and your withholding and everything else that goes against your tax liability, when you do your return at the end of the year and you found out that more has been withheld than you actually owe, then you get back the difference. And some people think that's the government giving me money. No, you're getting back your own money, which is what that is.
Yeah.
And the idea, of course, is that the fair tax must be progressive, meaning that it can't unduly burden those on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And so what the prebate does, it will rebate back to you, refund back to you the fair tax that you pay on the register on your spending up to the poverty level. Because the government figures that out, how much it takes to support a, household of X number of people, 2 adults, 2 kids, for example. And they know what that spending level is that you have to spend to just barely maintain yourself. And 23% of that is what you will pay in fair tax on your basic necessities, but the prebate gives that back to you, so your out-of-pocket thing is nothing. So you get a bigger paycheck, plus you get your tax refund, you get this prebate once a month. So under the fair tax, you get a lot more money in your pocket. And we've got some, I know that it's not really good radio just to sit here and read off a lot of numbers. That's not really interesting. So we'll try to make this as interesting and as relevant as we can. But we do have some figures on the relative purchasing power. Yeah. Under the income tax versus under the fair tax.
Yeah, I've struggled with this for several years, and I'm glad I found this on Facebook a few weeks ago. It's first off, it was difficult to get some of the fair tax volunteers to accept the fact that it's not just as simple that the prices are going to go down. Going to go up a certain amount, go down a certain amount. It's prices and income. Cash on hand versus what changes in the store. It's a combination of those two things. Well, there's a fellow by the name of Donald Koop, and I did not know that this man had done this work several years ago, but he put together a chart that he calls relative purchasing power, and this does address what is going to happen under the fair tax. What's going to happen to you, the consumer, all right, and the employee under the fair tax. And like Bob says, without getting, grinding the numbers on radio with too much, he set up a situation here, situation for one single adult, one adult
Let's make
household.
this easy.
Yeah.
So the figures add out really well.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, all right, this person is making $26,000 a year, which is a $500 paycheck every week.
You earn $500 a week under that.
All right. Payroll tax is 7.65. That has to come out. The income tax, that has to come out. That's 45.14. And then money in the wallet. So you start out earning $500 a month or a week, but you actually take home $416.61 because the rest of it goes to withholding.
Yeah, the withholding and the payroll taxes that go away under the fair tax will take out the difference between $500 and $416.61 if you want to be absolutely precise about it. On the fair tax side of the issue there, that same $500 a week salary that you would get, the payroll tax goes to zero. The income tax withholding goes to zero. Plus, and we've prorated this into a weekly figure. The prebate will actually be given monthly, but we've prorated this into a weekly figure. And this particular one adult household would get a prebate of $52 and change, $52.54 per week. So the difference in your wallet under the current income tax, $416.61. Under the fair tax, you've got $552.54 in your wallet at the end of every payday.
Now, let's say that this person wants to buy something that costs $500, maybe a new high-def TV, something like that. So they have to buy. They find the one they want, costs $500. Under the current system with the income tax, where they earn $500 a week, but they only take home $416 and change, how long does this person have to work in order to afford that $500 TV? Well, he has to work 1.2 weeks. All right, it's just very simple. The $500 item divided by the $416.61. He has to work 1.2 weeks. Now, under the fair tax, this is a different situation.
Now, this is also where there's a bit of a little ambiguity. There's not an exact science on this as to exactly what's going to happen to retail prices under the fair tax. Because remember, the fair tax is collected at the retail level on new goods and services. Keyword there, new. But the best research we could find, and we're just going to use as an example here, that the total price that the TV that costs $500 now, when the fair tax is in place, will cost $565, roughly about a 13% increase in retail prices. And people look at that and say, no good. But they forget to remember that they've got a whole lot more money in their wallet to buy that with.
Which is their purchasing power.
Which is your purchasing power. How much have you got that you can actually spend? If the government takes it away from you in withholding and payroll taxes, that's not yours to spend. So using the same formula, when you figure if you've got $552 in your wallet every paycheck, that's your entire paycheck plus your prebate, and you're looking at an item that used to cost $500 but now costs $565, you look at how long you have to work to get that. $565 is just a touch above the $552. So under the current income tax, where you had to work for 1.2 weeks to purchase that TV, under the fair tax, it's only 1.02. So your relative purchasing power is relatively 18% greater under the fair tax. Even though the prices, retail prices, will go up some, you will have a lot more money in your wallet to pay for it. And hopefully we haven't confused you and made you turn the radio off saying, what in the world are these guys talking about yet?
However, you can send us an email at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com, and we'd be happy to send you copies of these charts. All right. Like I said, I want to make sure that Donald Coop receives attribution for this, because he came up with the idea. What his figures were about 5 or 6 years old, maybe a little longer, and so they were with older prebate figures and older income tax figures. I updated them last week to the 2016 figures, and so the whole purpose of this show is to explain that it's not as simple as how much the prices on things change. Prices on things change, your income changes, all right? Your relative purchasing power. The point is that your relative purchasing power under the fair tax is going to be greater in every scenario we can look at.
Yeah, I mean, just again, in round numbers, if prices go up 10% and your income, actually your disposable income, what you got in your hand, goes up 20%, you come out ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And now, Mr. Coop went further. He, along with the one adult household, he did this scenario with several households. First off, staying at the weekly income of $500, the weekly wage of $500. Okay, he went to a one adult, one child household. Well, the relative purchasing power is 1.15. In other words, there's a 15% advantage under the fair tax than the current system. With the earning $500 a week, the 2 adults and 2 kids. And I don't know how anybody can support a family of 4 on $500 a week. But anyways, they would have a huge advantage. They would have a 23% advantage under the fair tax than the current system.
And then, you bump that up a little bit. Just double that. Instead of $26,000, you go $52,000 a year, which is $1,000 a week. That one adult household would have a 22% more purchasing power under the fair tax. The one adult, one child would have 19% more, and the 2 adult, 2 children would have 14% more. And of course, these are all figures that this Donald Coop came up with. And we're, again, not going to bore you with all the nuts and bolts behind them, but that's just the final result of it. And even though retail prices will rise some under the fair tax, that your purchasing power actually goes up because your income, what you have in your hand, what you have in your pocket with no withholding and no payroll taxes, goes up by even more.
Yeah, so that's the important point. Now, he went on to look at a weekly wage of $1,000, again, with a one adult household, one adult, one child, 2 adults, 2 children. And in every situation, people are better off under the fair tax, okay, without giving you all kinds of figures. Because, again, you can email us, and we'll be happy to share these charts with you.
But what's really cool, I mean, especially you like the better purchasing power. That is a huge advantage of the fair tax. But I just like not having to fill out any income tax returns anymore.
Yeah, think of the time you're not going to spend dealing with the income tax code and a tax return every April 15th. You know, that's got to be worth something.
That's worth a bunch. I mean, mine's relatively simple, and I still spent like 2.5 hours with TurboTax to get it all done. Yeah, that's with just your very simple standard deduction with my little PA announcing job on the side.
Yeah, Bob. And that's, you know, what's infuriating is that, well, okay, I'm going to go through all these deductible expenses. So you go through them one by one by one, and it takes all those hours to do it. And then come to find out the standard deduction is the way to go. So you spend all that time to find out what you probably already knew.
Yeah, I could have, if I wanted to go through the hassle and the effort, figured out, how many miles it takes I put on using my car, getting back and forth to this little side job I've got doing the PA announcing at the college, and how much I spend in the process of doing it. And I could deduct the mileage from my total mileage. It's way too much to figure out as to how much, what percent of my total mileage is actually done in the use of this little side business. It's just not worth it.
No.
You just don't take it.
So we spend all that time in record keeping and the expense of the tax software, and you end up taking the standard deduction.
Now,
but
for some people that they're on the road a lot and use their vehicle or have a home office, a lot of times that is. If you decide to do all the hassle and do all the math and figure out the percentage of how much of what you spend is on your business and how much is your personal, then that can make a difference for some people. But that's even more complicated. And all that goes away with a fair tax, every bit of it.
Yeah, compare all that nonsense that we were just talking about, their tax return, the business compliance costs. Oh, and there's one other thing with the business. Let's shift gears a little bit. Go back to a business. Not only do they have to make sure they're complying with the tax code, but if it's a decent business, they have to look for all the legal loopholes, tax avoidance. All right? It is legal to avoid taxes according to the tax code as long as you're obeying the tax code. So you're taking this deduction, that exemption, whatever. So on top of the compliance costs, there's the expense of learning the tax code so you can take legal exemptions and so forth.
And as we have seen, not even the experts can agree on what's the right answer.
Yeah, because Bob used that example.
It is way too complicated for even the experts to figure out and arrive at the same answer.
And all those expenses, Bob, who pays for all that stuff?
You do.
Yeah, we do. The consumers, all right? Yes, the company bears that expense, but it gets rolled into their cost of their product or service.
Yeah, people understand really easily that when you buy a product, say a wooden shed to keep your lawnmower and your garden tools in, that when you buy that shed, the cost of the plywood and the shingles, labor and materials is included in the price of what you pay. The consumer pays for it. What's not as apparent is that the income tax check that the XYZ shed company had to write to Uncle Sam, that's included in there too, and you just don't see it.
Yeah. Yep. So every business expense that they have to bear, whether it's increased taxes, increased compliance costs, or an increase in the price of their raw materials, whatever it is, if it's a business expense, the consumer is the one that bears it. Okay, and if it's an extremely competitive market and they can't raise their prices, well, then they have to cut labor, cut dividends. They have to make up for it somehow.
That's why jobs go to Mexico.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's always people that bear the expense. Okay, so when you hear a politician say that the companies have to pay their fair share, that's disingenuous because they know darn well that it's us that ends up paying for that.
Yeah, the consumer pays for that in the form of higher prices. The employees can pay for that in the terms of, if I've got to send this money to Uncle Sam, I don't have it to give in raises or better benefits. If it's a public company, the stockholders get lower dividends because there's not as much money to distribute that way. And so every time Uncle Sam takes a chunk out of somebody's bottom line, it's individuals that end up actually paying for that.
Yep. And again, compare that to the fair tax. First off, as we mentioned before, under the fair tax, there is no business-to-business tax. No fair tax on business-to-business purchases. All right. If a business has to buy a pickup truck, or they have to buy raw materials, glass or whatever, or they have to buy computers for their office, those things are not subject to tax because it just gets rolled into the price of their product. It is always the final consumer. But that's just the way it is now. I mean, it doesn't look like that, but that's really what happens. Right now, the final consumer is actually the one that pays for all that. So under the fair tax, we make it very straightforward. Business-to-business purchases will not be taxed. All the expenses will be borne by the consumer, us, just as they are now. So
It's a retail consumption tax collected at the cash register on the purchase, again, of new goods and services. And there's two things there. If you decide to buy used, no fair tax if you get stuff at the thrift shop, no fair tax if you buy a used car. You will be having to pay the fair tax on some services, like if you get a haircut now.
Yeah.
Most places, most states, we live in Florida, that particular service is not subject to state sales tax. So people will say, now, wait a minute, this fair tax is going to start taxing stuff that I'm not paying tax on now. Well, you're not specifically paying the state sales tax or something like that on, say, a haircut. But the money that you pay for that haircut is taxable income to the barber. So some of it ends up at the IRS as the barber's income tax. So the cost of the income tax system, again, is embedded into the price of services the same way it's embedded into the price of goods. So when you take out that component, the barber no longer has to pay income tax on that. And you add that back in at the retail level, again, the price may go up a little bit overall, but you'll have more money in your pocket to pay it, and your purchasing power goes up. So applied to new goods and services is exactly what we're doing now.
And that is the purpose of this entire episode, to explain how under the fair tax, you're going to have increased relative purchasing power. All right, relative purchasing power is going to be increased. It's not as simple as just, well, the prices are going to go up or down. It's a combination of what happens to the prices and what happens to your pocketbook. All right, and you're going to have more disposable cash in spite of the prices going up a bit.
Yeah, your pocketbook comes out really well under the fair tax. Again, the withholding goes away. The payroll taxes that support Social Security and Medicare, just those payroll taxes go away. The programs don't. Payroll taxes do. So you bring home a lot more. Now, if you've got a state income tax, or if you've got voluntary deductions for insurance or a savings plan or something like that, those things are not touched by the fair tax. But the lion's share of the difference between your gross amount and your net take-home pay is all this federal stuff that goes away under the fair tax.
Yep. So
you have more money.
And
I like that.
Who doesn't like more money? And plus the simplicity. I say this online all the time. The beauty of the fair tax is the simplicity. Everybody is going to love it. It's so simple and easy to get along with. It's what the founding fathers had in mind. Simple consumption taxes. Back then it was like excise taxes and things like that. They hated the idea of an income tax.
And so much that it was originally unconstitutional.
That's right. And then, of course, we had to put that 16th Amendment in there. That's too bad. We need to get rid of it. All right? Put the fair tax in, repeal the 16th Amendment. Let's get our collective lives in order, make them a lot simpler. Let's families do what they do best, is raise their families. Let businesses do what they do best and conduct business and create jobs.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time for this edition of FairtaX Power Radio. Let's quickly tell people how they can help us out.
Oh, there's all kinds of things. As I mentioned before, fairtax.org. That is the website of the Americans for Fair Taxation. You can sign up for the FairTax Friday newsletter. If you have any questions about how it affects an industry or how it's going to be collected, or this, that, and so forth, it's on there. There's a section of frequently asked questions. There's a section of videos, all kinds of stuff. Then we ask you to go to bigsolution.org. bigsolution.org. That's where you can help us out. First off, it's a very simple website. There's 4 buttons there: connect, support, contribute, and build. And without going into a lot of detail, that's how we're going to build our big, huge database, so that we can impress Congress that we have, umpteen million supporters. So,
yes, there have to be enough of us out there for the Congress critters to pay us a mind when we say we want the fair tax. So when you consider the tax code you've got now is exactly the one they want you to have, because they're in control of it, and we got to change their minds on it.
And don't forget the monthly webinar. It's generally the 4th Thursday of the month. Go to fairtax.org/webinar. Sign up for it. You have to register in advance. There's always something going on. Those guys are very knowledgeable, and that's a good way. And you can tell other people about that webinar, too. Everybody's invited. I mean, you don't have to be a FairTax fan. Get somebody who doesn't know anything about the fair tax to tune in on that. And, of course, keep listening to FairTax Power Radio.
And right quickly, if you'd like to get in touch with the program here, the FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com is our email address. We have a Facebook page as well, the FAIRtax Guys, so go to Facebook and check it out. And that's going to wrap it up, do it to it this time around. Ron, thank you for helping us out, as you always do. And let me remind you, the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
You'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming, don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming across the USA. Fair tax is coming, clean up this mess.